Hello everyone, welcome to Coding with Ivan, and in this video we're going to make this news application where we'll get all the news articles in a recycler view, and on every recycler view we'll show the news headline, the news source and the image of that particular news article. And as you can see, if we click on any of the news article, it will open that in a new activity where we can read the news article. Let's go back, and here at the top we have some news categories. So if we select any of the category, it will open or load the news articles of that particular category. Okay, let's try science. Alright, and we can also perform search for individual news articles. For example, if I search for Olympic, it will show us news articles which are about Olympic. Alright, so let's make this news application. So at first, as you can see, I have opened a new project on my Android Studio and I have named it as news app, and here we have our main activity.java and the activity main.xml file. So now at first, let's see from where we are going to get the news articles, as we are going to use REST API. So for this we have to go to a website called newsapi.org. So newsapi.org provides free API keys to get news articles. I'll give the link of this site also in the description. So after visiting this site, you have to create a free account here, and after creating that account you have to click on this get API key button. That will take you to this page, and there you can find your own API key. So we have to just copy this API key and go back to our Android Studio, and then we have to open the REST folder. Inside the values we will go into the strings.xml file, and inside here, let me zoom in, here we will create a new string object. I'll name this as API_key, and inside this we will paste our API key that we just copied. Alright, and now I'll go back to the website. So now we have to click on this back to home button, and then we will click on this documentation here, and from here I'll directly go to these top headlines here. So here, as you can see, we have the documentations and the API URL of our API. Okay, you can read the documentation here, like here is all the definitions that we have to pass the API key, that is mandatory, and then we can pass the country code to get the news articles of that particular country. We can also pass a category of news articles to get the news of this specific category. We can also pass specific sources, and we can also perform a search query. Alright, and under this we have the documentation of the response objects, like we will get a status object which is a string type, and we'll also get total results which is integer, and we'll get the articles which will be an array of the type articles. So inside the articles we will get all of this, the source, author, title, etc. You can read all of them, and from here we will get the URL of our API, and this will be a get method. So from here, let me just copy this URL, and then I'll open Postman. So if you don't have Postman in your PC, I'll give the download link of Postman in the description. Okay, so after going to Postman, I'll paste it here, and I'll set the method of the URL to get, and then I'll hit send here. So as you can see, we have the response of our URL, and here we have got the status okay, the total results is 38, and these are the articles that we have got. So the articles is an JSON array, and here we have few objects like the source, author, title, description, etc. And inside the source we have two more objects, which is the ID and the name of that source. Okay, so we have to make classes for all of these objects. So let's go to our Android Studio and start the UI design first, and then we'll make classes and objects of this response. Alright, so let's go back to our Android Studio. So from here I'll go to our activity main.xml file, and inside here I'll just remove this constraint layout, and I'll add a new linear layout here. I'll set the orientation of this to vertical, and then I'll change the text view here, and I'll add a recycler view. I'll set the width of this recycler view to match parent and the height also to match parent. Let's give this recycler view an ID. I'll call this recycler_main. Let's give this a margin also. I'll set the margin to 8 dp. And now I'll create a custom layout file for our single items of the recycler view. So for this, I'll go into this layout, I'll right click on it and create a new layout resource file. I'll name this headline_list_items. Okay, let's click on OK here and go to the splits view, and here I'll change the constraint layout to a card view. Let's shrink this. Okay, so here for the card view, I'll pass an ID for it. I'll pass, let's say, main_container, and then I'll change the height of this card view to wrap content. Then I'll give this a card elevation of 8 dp, and I'll also pass a margin of 8 dp. And then inside this card view, I'll create a new linear layout. I'll set the width of this layout to match parent and the height of this layout to wrap content. Alright, then I'll set the orientation of this linear layout to be horizontal. I'll give this a layout margin of 6 dp, and I'll set the weight sum of this linear layout to 3. So inside this linear layout, we'll show our news headline and the news source name besides of the news image. So for this, inside this linear layout, I'll create another linear layout, and this time I'll set its width to 0 dp as we're going to use weights here. And for the height of this layout, I'll pass wrap content. Let's set the weight of this to 2. Alright, and I'll also change its orientation here. I'll set it to vertical because this linear layout will contain the text views which will show the news headline and the news source vertically. Alright, let's also give this layout a margin of 8 dp. Okay, now inside this linear layout, we will add 2 text views to store the news headline and the news source. So for this, at first I'll create a new text view here. I'll set the width of this to match parent and the height to wrap content. Let's close this. I'll give this text view an ID also. I'll call this text_title. I'll set the text size of this to 22 sp. Okay, let's set the text style also to be bold here for the headline. Let's set the text color of this to color black. Alright, and let's also set the maximum lines for the headline text view. So I'll write max lines equals 3. So that's it for our title text view. So now we have to create another text view to show the news source. So for this, I'll just copy this text view and paste it under here, and here I'll change the ID to text_source, and I'll set the text size to 18 sp this time, and text style, let's keep it bold. The text color, I'll change it to what we have here. Okay, @color/purple 500. You can pass any color that you want. You can also pass any hex code of any color. And I'll also change the max lines here from 3 to 1, and then I'll also add a margin to the top of this text view. So like margin top, and here I'll pass 6 dp. I guess 6 dp will be enough. So now our text views are ready. Let's minimize this layout, and under this we will pass our image view to show the image of this particular news. So I'll here add a new image view. I'll set its width to 0 dp as we're going to use weights here, and for the height I'll pass match parent. Okay, let's close this and let's give this an ID. For the ID I'll call this img underscore headline. Let's set the weight here. So for the layout underscore weight I'll pass 1. Okay, now let's use a placeholder image for the image view here. So for the placeholder image I'll be using this one. I'll give the download link of this image also in the description. So I'll just copy this and go back to my Android Studio, and here I'll go inside the drawable folder. I'll right click on it and paste it here. Alright, so inside the drawable folder here is our not underscore available.jpg. So I'll add this to our image view here. So let src equals at drawable slash not available, and let's also change the scale type of this image view to center crop. Okay, alright, so now let's go to the Postman to see the API response object names so that we can create custom model classes for them. Alright, so here at first in the JSON object we have got the status, the total results, and the articles. So articles is a JSON array of a custom model where there are multiple objects like the source, author, title, description, etc. And for the source we have also a custom model where we'll get the ID and the name. Okay, so at first create a custom model for this one, the source. So for this I'll go back to my Android Studio here. Let's close all of this and I'll create here a new package. So I'll just create a new package. I'll call this models, and inside this models I'll create a new class, new Java class. I'll call this as source. Let me zoom in, and here for the source classes object we have this ID and the name. Okay, so let's do that. So both of the items of the source is string object, so the ID is a string and the name is also a string. So for this let's create them. Let's go back to the Android Studio, and here I'll create a string. I'll call this ID, and then I'll create another string. I'll call this name. Alright, and make sure one thing, that the object name we are defining here should be same as what it is inside this API. Okay, so this is our source object where we have the two items. Now let's also create the getter and setter method for them. So I'll just right click here, create on generate, and click on this getter and setter. Let's select both of them, click on OK. So here we got the getter and setter methods. So this is for the source class of our response object. Now besides of source we have these other objects in our articles class or the articles model. So let's create another model for the articles where we'll create a object for the source and the other string objects. Okay, let's go back to the Android Studio, and here let's close this and I'll create a new model inside this model class. So I'll create a new Java class here. I'll name this as, let's call this news headlines. Alright, hit enter and let me zoom in here a little bit. So for the news headlines we have this source object, the author, title, description, etc. So let's create a source object first. So I'll go here, and here I'll create a new source object of this source class. So I'll write source, and I'll call this as source because it's named as source inside our API, as you can see. So let's set this value to null for the first time, and then let's add another objects or the other objects. So we have the author here. Let's copy this and I'll write string author equals empty. So similarly I'm going to add all the other objects. Alright, so here I have created all the objects according to the name inside this API response. Okay, so here let's also create the getter and setter for all these items. So I'll right click here, click on generate, click on getter and setter. I'll select all of them and click on OK. So we got the all getter and setter methods of these items. So now let's go back to our API again. So here in the response we created the source class object and also the also the model for these articles. So we have to create another class for the whole response where there will be the objects for the status, the total results, and the articles, and the articles will be a array. So let's go back to the Android Studio again, and let's close this here, and I'll create a new model class here. So right click here, create a new Java class. I'll call this as, let's say, news API response. Let me zoom in here. So here at first we will create object for the status, and then for the total results, and for the articles, which will be an array. So let's do that. So here in the class's body I'll write a new string. I'll call this as status. Then there will be an integer which will be named as total results. So I'll create a new integer. I'll call this total results. And then there will be a list of the articles. So I'll create a new list, and the type of the list will be the object news headlines. So I'll write news headlines, and let's call this articles because it's defined as articles inside our API response. Alright, so now let's also create a getter setter for all of this. So I'll click on generate, getter and setter. I'll select them all and click on OK. Alright, so now we have created all the model classes for our response object. So now we can start working in our main activity. But before that, let us create the custom view holder and adapter for our Recyclerview, where we'll show the news headlines. So for this I'll create a new Java class. I'll call this as custom view holder. Let's zoom in here, and here I'll make this class extends Recyclerview dot view holder. Okay, so it's showing an error. If we click on this button, it will ask us to create constructor matching super. Let's click on that, and this is our constructor. So here at first we have to create objects for our view items that we created for our Recyclerview items in the headline underscore list underscore items here. So there we had two text views and one image view. So I'll create the text view object here. I'll call this as text underscore title, then the text underscore source. Alright, then I'll create another object for the image view. I'll call this img underscore headline. Alright, and finally we can create another object for the card view, which we named as main container. We'll need that to create the on-click listener for the Recyclerview. So I'll create a new object, card view. I'll call this, let's say, card view, and let's initialize them inside this constructor. So I'll go under the super item view, and here I'll write, at first let's write the text title equals item view dot find view by id r dot id dot text underscore title. Okay, similarly I'll add the text underscore source equals item view dot find view by id r dot id dot text underscore source. Alright, let's also initialize our image view here. So image headline equals item view dot find view by id r dot id dot img underscore headline. Okay, let's also initialize the card view. So card view equals item view dot find view by id r.id dot main container it was. Okay, so our custom view holder is now done. Now we can close this and create a custom adapter. So I'll right click here and create a new Java class. Again, I'll call this custom adapter. Okay, let me zoom in here, and here I'll make this extends Recyclerview dot adapter, and here in the angle bracket I'll pass the view holder that we created, which is the custom view holder. Okay, it's showing an error. We can click on this red bulb and it will ask to implement the methods and also ask to make the constructor. So let's click on this implement method here. First select all of these three and click on OK. So here we got these methods: the get item count, the on bind view holder, and the on create view holder. Okay, so here at first in the main class we will create object that we will pass for our custom adapter, and we'll also create a constructor. So at first I'll create an object for the context. So I'll write private context and I'll call this context, and then we'll also pass a list of news headlines to our Recyclerview to show them. So I'll again create an object, a private list of, let's say, news headlines, and I'll call this as headlines. Okay, and then we can create the constructor. So I'll just right click here, click on generate, click on constructor, and I'll select both of them and click on OK. So this is our constructor here. Okay, so now inside this on create view holder, instead of returning null, we will return a new custom view holder, and here I'll call the layout inflator dot from, and here I'll pass the context, and then I'll write dot inflate, and here I'll pass the layout file that we created here, the headline underscore list underscore items. So here I'll write r dot layout dot headline underscore list underscore items, and then the second parameter is the parent that we got here. So I'll write parent, and the third parameter will be false. Okay, so that's it for our on create view holder. Now on the on bind view holder, we'll add the objects of this news headline. So for this we have to go inside this on bind view holder first. So here I'll call the text views and the image view, and I'll attach all the data for that particular views here. So for this, at first I'll write the holder dot text underscore title dot set text, and here I'll pass the headlines dot get from position dot get title. All right, and then we'll also add the text source for our source of that news. So as you can see inside the API response, our source name is inside the source object, which is in the articles. So for this we have to write holder dot text underscore source dot set text, and I'll call the headlines dot get from position dot get source, because our name is inside the source. So get source dot get name. All right, so now we have to also show the image of that news article inside the image view. To show the news image inside the image view, we are going to use a new library called Picasso. So for this, let's go to Google and search for Picasso library. Let's click on this link. I'll give the link on the description. So from here we have to copy the dependency. Where is that dependency? All right, this one. We'll just copy that and go back to the Android Studio, and inside the Gradle files we'll open the module level Gradle file, and here inside these dependencies I'll paste it and click on sync now. Alright, so now we can go to the custom adapter here, and here at first we'll check if our image URL is empty or not. So if it is empty, then we won't show any image here. That will by default show the placeholder image that we already pasted here, as you can see, this image. Okay, so let's quickly do that. For this I'll write if headlines dot get position dot get URL to image not equals null. So if it is not null, then that means we have an image URL inside the string. So in that case we load the URL in our image view. So in order to load that image inside the image view with Picasso, I'll write Picasso. Okay, let's click on import class here. Okay, so Picasso dot get dot load, and here we have to pass the string of the URL. So for this I'll write headlines dot get from position dot get URL to image, and then go outside here and I need to write dot into, and here I'll pass the image view where we want to show the image. So the image view was holder dot img headline. Alright, so that's it for our onBind view holder. Now we have to go to the get item count, and here instead of returning 0 we'll return headlines dot size. Alright, so our custom adapter is now ready. Now we can go to our main activity here, and in order to manage our requests we are going to use the Retrofit library. So let's quickly install the dependencies for our retrofit. So I'll go here, this link, the Retrofit GitHub repository. I'll give all the links that I'm showing here in the description. So from here we have to copy the dependency of the retrofit. So the retrofit's dependency should be somewhere here. Okay, this one, the com.squareup. Okay, so let's copy that and go back to our Android Studio. Again I'll go into the module level Gradle file, and here I'll write implementation, and inside the quotation I'll paste the dependency that we just copied. Alright, and then we'll also need the JSON converter for our retrofit. So for this I'll search for JSON converter dependency. So let's go to this link. I'll give the link of this JSON converter also in the description. So from here I'll just copy this, the dependency, and go to the Android Studio, and here I'll paste it here. So here as you can see it's showing an error because we have to pass the latest version. So I'll just copy the version for the retrofit and paste it here again. Alright, so now let's click on sync now. So once it's done we can go to our main activity.java here, and we'll start our API calling here. Let's not make a mess inside our main activity, rather we will create a new class where we will manage all the API calls. So let's quickly create a new Java class here. I'll call this as request manager, and let me zoom in. So here at first let's create an object for the context. So I'll write context, I'll call this context, and then let's create a object for the retrofit and make our API calls here. So I'll write retrofit, I'll create the object retrofit equals new retrofit dot builder, and here we need to add some more attributes like the dot base URL here. And for the base URL, if we go to the API documentation here, so here this part of our API URL, this is the API base URL. So I'll just copy this one and I'll go back to the Android Studio and I'll paste it inside a quotation. So this is our base URL, and then I'll add the converter factory. So I'll write dot add converter factory, and I'll write the JSON converter factory dot create. and then finally I'll write dot build, and then here I'll create a constructor for our request manager class. So I'll just right click here and click on generate on constructor, and from here I'll only select the context here and click on OK. Alright, so this is our constructor. Let's minimize this, and here we'll manage our API calls. Okay, so in order to manage the API call, I'll go down here, and here I'll create a new interface. So I'll call this as public interface. I'll call this call news API. So here I'll make a call for the news API response. So I'll write news API response, and I'll call this as call headlines. Okay, and inside the methods parameter we have to pass the, okay, let's make this as call headlines with capital H. Okay, so inside the methods parameter we have to pass some queries that we want to make. So as you can see inside the documentation, we had these queries. We can pass the API key, the country, the category, sources, queries. I'll just use the country, the category, and the query search here. Alright, so let's go back here, and here I'll create a new query with the annotation of @query, and for the query we have to pass the exact value that are written here. Like for the country we have to pass this country. So I'll just copy this value from here, go back to Android Studio, and here inside the quotation I'll paste it. So for the country we'll pass a string for the country, string country, and then we can pass another query. So I'll write @query, and here inside the quotation we can pass, let's pass the category now. So I'll copy the category from here and I'll paste it here, and for the string I'll pass a string category, and then we can pass another query where we'll search for a specific news. So that query was named as Q. So we can go back to Android Studio and write here Q, and here for this string we'll pass, let's say, query, and finally we have to pass the API key. As you can see here, the API key is required here. So the name of the parameter is API key. So I'll just copy this and I'll pass another query, and this time in the quotation, inside the quotation I'll paste it, the API key, and then for the string let's create the object as API underscore key. Alright, let's add a semicolon here to close. So as you can see inside our API documentation, our API calling will be inside this top headlines endpoint. So we have to just copy this top headlines from here and go back to the Android Studio, and here before this call I'll add the get annotation because our call is a get method, as you can see in the documentation here. So here for the parameter I'll pass the endpoint, the top headlines. Alright, so our call API interface is now done. Let's minimize it and go up here, and here we'll create a new method where we'll manage our API calling. So at first let's create a listener class so that we can handle the responses from our main activity. So for this I'll just go here and create a new Java class. I'll call this as onFetchData listener, and that will be an interface. Let's hit enter. Okay, let me zoom in here. So inside this public interface onFetchData listener, I'll create two methods here. So the first method will be the void onFetchData. Let's write the F with capital 1. okay, the on fetch data. So if we get the data, so we'll get this as a list of the news headlines. So I'll write list of news headlines. I'll call this as list, and we'll also get a message of string message. All right, and similarly I'll create another method to handle the error. So I'll write on error, and here we'll only pass the message. So I'll write the string message. Alright, so that's it, our on fetch data listener. Now we can go back to the request manager class here, and here we'll start a new method where we'll manage our API call. So I'll write the method public void get news headlines. So here for the method's parameter, at first we'll pass the listener. So I'll write on fetch data listener. I'll call this as listener, and then we can pass the category. So I'll write string category, and then we can pass the query that we want. So I'll write a string query. All right, let's go to the method body here. So inside the method body we'll start our API calling. So for this I'll write call news API that we created here. So call news API, I'll create an object for this call news API equals retrofit, which we created here, retrofit dot create, and here I'll again call the call news API dot class. All right, and then I'll create a call object. So I'll write call news API response, and I'll call this call equals, I'll call the call news API here. So call news API, and from this class I'll call this call headlines method. So I'll write dot call headlines, and here we need to pass the parameters that we defined here. So at first let's pass the country name. So by default I am passing the country name as US. You can pass IN if you want to see news for India. You can pass UK for United Kingdom. I'm passing US, and you can see the country codes here. Okay, you can pass any of the country codes that are mentioned here. Okay, let's go back to the Android Studio. So country name is I'm sending US, and then we have the category. So for the category I'll pass the string category that we got from the parameter, and then for the query I'll pass the string query that we passed for the parameter, and finally for the API key, this one, the API key, we'll pass the API key that we have stored in our string file at the start of the video here, as you can see. So I'll go to the request manager here, and here to get the API key from the string file I'll write get string. Okay, we have to pass the context first. So context dot get string r dot string dot API underscore key. All right, so now here I'll create a try block, and inside the try block we'll just call our API. So I'll write call dot enqueue, and here I'll create a new callback. So I'll write new callback news API response. So here we got the methods, the on response and the on failure here. Okay, and here it's showing an error because we need to add the exception also for the try block. So I'll write catch, I'll call this as exception e, and inside the body I'll write e dot print stack trace. Okay, so now let's work on this on response and the on failure. So for the on response I'll check if the response is not successful. So I'll write response dot is successful. I'll add a not here. So the API response is not successful, then we'll show a toast message toes.makeText, and here at first I'll pass the context, and for the text I'll pass, let's say, error. Alright, so now let's go outside of this if statement, and here let's call the listener that we got from the parameter here. So I'll call the listener here, listener dot on fetch data, as we are getting the response here. So on fetch data, and for the parameter of the on fetch data we had to pass the list of the news headlines and the message. So for the parameter here, at first I'll pass the response dot body dot get articles, so that will get the news articles, and we'll pass this through our listener, so that will get the news articles from the API response and pass it to our listener. And then for the second parameter we had to pass the message, so I'll write the response dot message here. Alright, so that's it for our on response. Now let's go to the on failure. So in case of the on failure we had to pass only the message, so here I'll pass the message listener dot on error, and here we'll pass a message. So for the message I'm passing request failed. Alright, so that's it for our API handling. Now we have to call this get news headlines method from the main activity to get the API response. Alright, so now let's quickly go to the main activity here, and here I'll go into the onCreate method here, and here I'll create the request manager class object. So I'll call the request manager, I'll call this as manager equals new request manager, and here we need to pass the context. So I'll write this, and then I'll call the manager object dot get news headlines, and here we need to pass the parameters. And for the parameter, at first we have to pass the on fetch data listener. So actually let's create the listener first. So I'll go outside of the on create method. So here I'll create a private final on fetch data listener of news API response, and I'll call this as listener equals new on fetch data listener. So as you can see, it's showing an error here for the news API response argument here. That is because on the listener we forgot to add the news API response here. So here I'll write news API response. Okay, now let's go to the main activity, and the error is now gone here. Here again you need to pass the news API response. Alright, so now for the on fetch data we will show the news articles inside the Recyclerview, and for the on error we will just show a error message. So now let's go back to the manager.get news headlines, and here for the parameter, at first I'll pass the listener that we just created here, and then we'll pass the query or the category that we want to search first. So by default we'll show the category of general, and while passing this, make sure the text is same as what defined here. So here the general is this one, we'll just copy this and paste it here. Okay, and then third parameter was the query. So at first when we'll run the app, for the query we'll pass null. Okay, so now that we have got the API response on the listener, we can show the news articles in a Recyclerview. So for this, at first let's create an object for the Recyclerview, but before that it's showing some error here. What's the error? Okay, there is the error. We'll just need to add a semicolon here. Okay, so now let's create an object for our Recyclerview. So I'll just go here, create an object for Recyclerview. I'll call this as Recyclerview, I'll also create an object for the custom adapter. So I'll call this custom adapter. I'll call this adapter. Okay. Alright, so now let's go into the onFetch data here, and here I'll call a method show news, and here for the parameter I'll pass this list. So I'll pass this list here. Alright, so now we have to create this method. So I'll click on here, create method on the main activity. So here we got this method, private void show news, and the parameter is the list of news headlines. So inside this method's body we'll initialize our Recyclerview. So I'll write Recyclerview equals find view by id r.id.recycler main, and then I'll write Recyclerview dot set has fixed size to true, and then I'll set the layout manager for our Recyclerview. So Recyclerview dot set layout manager new grid layout manager, and here I'll first pass the context this, and then for the span count I'll pass 1. Alright, and then I'll initialize the custom adapter. So I'll call this adapter that we created up here. So adapter equals new custom adapter, and here I'll pass the context, which is this, and then for the list of the news headlines I'll pass the list that we got from the parameter. So I'll pass list here. Alright, and then we'll attach this adapter to our Recyclerview. So I'll write Recyclerview dot set adapter, and I'll pass this adapter here. Alright, so now before testing the app we have to add the internet permission inside our manifest file. So I'll open the manifest file, and here under this manifest I'll add uses permission tag, and I'll write android.permission.internet. Let's close this. Now let's run our application to see what are we getting in our app. Alright, so as you can see we are getting all the news articles inside our app, and this is the news headline, this is the news headline, this is the news source, and this is the news image that we got. Alright, so now if you want to add a progress dialog while loading the news articles, so for this we have to go into the main activity.java here, and here let's define a global object for the progress dialog first. So I'll write progress dialog, I'll call this as dialog, and I'll initialize it here. So I'll write dialog equals new progress dialog, and I'll pass the context here, this, add a semicolon, and then I'll start our progress dialog. So for this at first I'll write the dialog dot set title, and for the title I'll pass fetching news articles. Alright, and then we can show the dialog. So I'll write dialog dot show. Okay, so now it will show the dialog whenever we'll open the app, and after we get the news from this response. So while after adding the news in the Recyclerview, we'll just dismiss our dialog. So I'll write dialog dot dismiss. Okay, so now let's try to run our application again to see the changes. It's showing fetching news articles dialog, and after getting the news articles it dismisses the dialog. Alright, so now let's try to create a on-click listener for this Recyclerview items to show them inside a new activity. So let's quickly do that. For this at first I'll go here and create a new listener class. I'll call this as select listener, and that will be an interface. So inside this interface I'll create a new method called void on news clicked. Alright, and for the on news clicked parameter, I'll pass the news headline object. So I'll call the news headlines. I'll call this as headlines. Okay, so now to implement this, at first we have to go to our custom adapter here, and here I'll create an object for our listener that we just created. So private select listener, I'll call this as listener semicolon, and I'll add this to our constructor also. So for this, I'll go here in the parameter of the constructor, I'll call select listener, the object listener, and then inside the constructor's body, I'll write this dot listener equals listener. Okay, so after that, I'll go inside the on bind view holder, and here I'll create the on click listener for the card view, which is the main container of our items of the recycler view. So I'll write holder dot card view dot set on click listener new view dot on click listener, and here on the on click method, I'll call the listener dot on news clicked, and here for the parameter we have to pass the news headlines object. So we can get that by simply writing headlines dot get from position. Okay, so now let's go to our main activity, and here it's already showing an error inside this custom adapters constructor because we have just updated the constructor. So at first I'll go up here and I'll write this as implements select listener. So it's showing an error. If we click on this red bulb, it will ask us to implement the methods. So let's click on this. I'll select this one and click on OK. So here we have got this on news clicked method. Alright, so now here for the custom adapters constructor, I'll pass the listener. So for the listener, I'll pass this. Okay, so our error is now gone. So now if the user clicks on the single item of the recycler view, we have to create a new activity where we'll show the news details of that particular news. So for this, at first here we have to create a new activity. So let's create a activity by clicking on here. I'll right click here, create a new, go to this activity, and I'll select this empty activity, and I'll name it as details activity. Alright, and click on finish. So these are details activity.java and the activity details.xml. So at first let's actually finish this from here. So here inside this on news click method, I'll start a new activity by calling this start activity, and here I'll create a new intent. So I'll write new intent, and this will be from main activity dot this to our details activity dot class. Alright, and also with this intent we have to pass the data that we got from here in the parameter. So I'll just go here after this class, and I'll create a new line here, and I'll write dot put extra. So here for the name of the data, I'll pass data, and for the data that we are passing here, we are passing the headlines. So I'll just pass the headlines here. Okay, so it's showing an error because our data is not parcelable. For this we have to go inside the model classes. At first let's go into this news API response. So here I'll make this implements serializable. Okay, let's go to the news headlines again, and this time I'll also make this implements serializable. For the source, I'll also pass implements serializable. Alright, now let's go to the main activity, and here as you can see our error is now gone. Okay, so we are passing our headlines object to our new activity with this name data. So now let's go to the details activity. So I'll just close the others and I'll only open the activity details XML file. Let's go to split mode, and here at first let's design the UI of our details activity. So here at first I'll change this root layout to a linear layout, and I'll set the orientation of this layout to vertical, and then inside this linear layout I'll add a scroll view, and the size of the scroll view will be match parent and match parent. And inside the scroll view I'll create a new linear layout, and for the linear layers width and height I'll pass match parent for the width, and for the height I'll pass wrap content. Okay, and then I'll set the orientation of our this linear layout to be vertical, and then inside this linear layout I'll create a new card view, and for the card views width I'll pass match parent, and for the height of the card view I'll pass wrap content here. Let's close this tag, and for the card views card elevation I'll pass 8 dp here, and let's also give this a margin around of 8 dp. Okay, so now inside this card view we'll again add a new linear layout, and this time for the width of this layout I'll pass match parent, for the height I'll pass wrap content. Let's close this, and then inside this linear layout for the orientation I'll pass vertical. Let's also give this a margin of 6 dp, and then inside the body or inside this linear layout I'll create a text view first. So I'll create a text view where I'll show the news title. So here for the width of this text view I'll pass match parent, for the height I'll pass wrap content here. Let's close this, and then let's give this an ID. I'll call this text underscore detail underscore title. All right, I'll change the text color of this to color black. I'll set the text style to be bold here, and the text size to be 26 sp here. And then under this text view I'll create a new image view where I'll show the image of that news. So for the width of that image view I'll pass match parent, and for the height let's pass 250 dp here. Let's close this tag and also give this image view an ID. I'll call this img underscore detail underscore news. All right, and then let's set the scale type of that news article to center crop, and then let's also set a placeholder image. So for this I'll write src drawable / not available that we already used in our Recyclerview items. Actually not pass center crop here, that won't look much better, hence we will pass fit xy. Okay, so that will get the full height and width of that image view. Alright, so now let's do another thing. We'll set a margin to the top of our image view of, let's say, 8 dp, and then let's go under this image view again, and here I'll add a new text view where I'll show the author of that news. So for the width of this text view I'll pass match parent, for the height I'll pass wrap content here, for the ID of this text view I'll pass text underscore detail underscore author. Okay, let's also give this a margin to the top of 6 dp. I'll set the text color of this to color purple that we already used in the Recyclerview items, and I'll set the text size of this to let's say 16 sp. Alright, so now similarly I'll just copy this text view again under this, and this time I'll set the ID of this to text underscore details underscore time. Okay, and here I'll show the publishing time of that text or that news. Okay, let's change the color of these to color black again. Okay, so now let's go under this card view, and here I'll show the detail and the content of that news. So at first I'll create a new text view here, and I'll set the width as match parent. For the height I'll pass wrap content here. Let's give this ID as text underscore detail underscore detail. Okay, and I'll set the text size to, let's say, 22 sp. I'll also set the text color to color black, and I'll also set this a margin to the top of 8 dp. Alright, so now we have to create another text view to show the content of that news. So I'll write text. For the ID I'll pass text underscore detail underscore content, and here I'll just change the text size to 20 sp. The color will be black and the rest will be same. Okay, so our UI for the activity details is now done. Now we can go to the details activity.java file. So here at first we have to capture the data from the intent that we passed from the main activity. So before that I'll create a new object for the news headlines. I'll call this as headlines, and then we'll try to get the data. So for this I'll go into this onCreate method, and here I'll call the headlines object that we just created equals, I'll call the get intent dot get serializable extra, and here I'll pass the name as data. As in the main activity we passed the name of our data as data, so I'm writing here the same data. Okay, let's add a semicolon here, and it's showing an error because we need to cast these two news headlines. Okay, let's click on that. Okay, so now our error is gone. So we got the news headline from the intent right here inside this object. So now we have to show the data from this object to our view elements. So at first let's initialize our view elements first. So I'll create object for the text view first. So the first one was txt underscore title, then txt underscore author, then txt underscore time, then txt underscore detail, then txt underscore content. Alright, and then I'll create object for the image view. So image view, I'll call this as img news. Okay, so now let's initialize them inside here. So I'll go up here first, and here I'll write txt title equals find view by id r.id dot txt text underscore detail underscore title. Alright, so similarly I'll initialize all the other view elements. Alright, so here I have defined or initialized all the view items here. So now it's time to set the data to these views. So for this I'll go after this, after getting the values from the headlines, because if you define or set values before that you may get the null pointer exception error. Okay, so I'll go here, and at first I'll write txt title dot set text, and here I'll pass our headline object dot get title. Okay, and then I'll call the txt author dot set text, and I'll pass the headlines dot get author. Okay, and then for the time txt time dot set text, and I'll call the headlines dot get published at. Okay, then for the txt detail dot set text, I'll pass headlines dot get detail, so get description. Okay, and then for the txt underscore content dot set text, I'll pass headlines dot get content. All right, and finally we can set the image to our img news. So for this we'll again use Picasso. So I'll write here Picasso dot get dot load, and here I'll pass the headlines dot get URL to image, and I'll go outside here and I'll write dot into, and here I'll pass the img news. Okay, so that's it for the details activity. So now let's try to run our application again and see what are the changes. Fetching news, and here we got all the news articles. So let's select any one of them. Let's select this one. So here as you can see we got into the detail activity, and there is the news headline, the image, the author of that news article, and then there is the time of publishing the news, and then we got the details of that news. All right, let's select another one. Let's select this one. Okay, it doesn't have any data maybe. Okay, let's select this one. Okay, all right, so as you can see our app is working fine. So now let's try to add the categories up here, and we'll also try to implement the search view to search for specific news articles. Okay, so let's quickly do that. So let's work on the categories first. So I'll just close all of them here, and now I'll go into the main activity and I'll go to the layout file of the main activity here. So here above this Recyclerview, I'll try to add the categories in a horizontal scroll view. Okay, you can also add a horizontal list view, but in my case, as there is only 7 items, I'm going to add a horizontal scroll view where I'll add the 7 buttons. So let me zoom in first here. So here above this Recyclerview, we have to add a horizontal scroll view, but before that make sure your orientation of this parent linear layout is vertical. So now here I'll add a horizontal scroll view. So I'll write horizontal scroll view, and here for the width of that I'll pass match parent, and for the height I'll pass wrap content here. Let's give this a margin of 6 dp. All right, and now inside this horizontal scroll view we have to create a new linear layout, and for the linear layout's width I'll pass match parent, and for the height of this I'll pass wrap content here. Okay, so now inside this linear layout we are going to add 7 buttons for the 7 categories. So let's create a button first. So for the width of this button I'll pass wrap content, and for the height of this button I'll also pass wrap content. Okay, let's give this button an ID. Here I'll pass a ID of btn slash or underscore, let's say 1, and then for the text of this button we have to pass the name of the category. So let's go to the documentation of our API, and here as you can see for the category we have these 7 types of categories. So I'll just copy this business from here. I'll copy this, go back to Android Studio, and I'll paste it here. Okay, let's change the text size of this button to let's say 12 sp. Okay, that's nice. let's give this a padding of 6 dp also, and let's also give this a margin around of 6 dp. Okay, so now let's try to copy this button 6 more times because we have 7 categories here. So I'll just copy this 1 2 3 4 5 6. Okay, 1 2 3 4 5 6 7. Okay, we have 7 buttons here. So now we have to just change the ID and the text of them. So the first one was the button 1 and the text of this button was business. So let's copy the entertainment now, and here I'll paste it. I'll change the ID to btn_2. Then again I'll copy this general from here, and here for the next button I'll pass or paste the general here and change the ID to btn_3. And here I'll copy this health, copy that, and here I'll pass this one. I'll just name the ID as btn_4. So let's do the same for the rest of the 3. So here we got all the 7 buttons for our categories. So now let's run our application one time to see how our buttons look. Okay, so these are the news articles, and here we have the buttons above. Okay, it looks good. So now let's try to create on-click listener for all of the buttons to fetch news articles for these specific categories. Okay, so here at first we need to initialize all the buttons. So I'll go into the main activity here, and I'll go up here and create objects for our buttons. So I'll write button. I'll make the objects as b1, b2, b4, b5, b6, b7. Okay, and now I'll initialize these buttons inside the onCreate method. So I'll just go here, and then I'll just initialize them by writing b1 equals find view by id r.id.btn1. Okay, so let me quickly initialize them all. Alright, so our buttons are now initialized. Now we have to implement on-click listener for the button. So what I'm going to do here is, as for the text of these buttons, I have already passed the category name as it is. So I'll create a common on-click listener, and when the user will click on the button, it will get the text from this button and will call the API with that particular text as the category. Okay, so for this I'll go up here, and after this implement select listener, I'll add a comma and I'll write view dot on click listener. Okay, so it's showing an error because we have to implement the method for this. So I'll click on here, click on implement methods, click on OK. So here we got this on click method. So here I'll convert the view that we got here from view to button, because all the items we are going to use here is a button. So I'll write button equals button, and I'll pass the view here. Okay, and then we'll get the category from the button's text. So I'll create a string here called category equals button dot get text dot toString. Okay, and then we'll call our API with this category. So for this, let's go up here on the where is the listener? Okay, so I'll just copy this and go down here, and here I'll paste it here. So before calling this request manager, I'll just create the progress dialog again. So I'll write dialog dot set title, and this time I'll pass fetching news articles of, and here I'll add the category. Okay, and then we have the request manager, and this time for the manager.getNews headlines, instead of passing the category general, we'll pass the category that we got from here. So I'll write category. Okay, so that will do the job. Now let's run our application again and see the changes. Fetching news. So here is the news of the general category. Now let's try to click on this sports. It's not working. That's because we forgot to add the on click listener to our buttons. Okay, so write b1 dot set on click listener, and I'll pass this. So similarly for all of the buttons we have to do the same. So let's quickly do that. b2 dot set on click listener, b3 dot set on click listener, this, b4 dot set on click listener, this, then b5 dot set on click listener, this, b6 dot set on click listener, this, and then b7 dot set on click listener, this. Alright, so now we have added the on click listener for all of the buttons. So I guess now our app should work. Let's run this. Okay, installing, fetching news articles, and here we got the news articles of the general category. Now let's click on this sports. So it fetched the news articles of the sports category, but our progress dialog is not working. So for that, maybe we forgot to show the progress dialog. Yes, I forgot. So for this I'll write dialog dot show, and then let's run our application again. Okay, let's click on technology now, fetching news articles of technology, and here we got the tech news. Okay, let's click on entertainment, and here we got the entertainment news. Okay, so our app is working fine. So now it's time to implement the search view to search for specific news articles or make a query to our API. So let's quickly do that. For this we have to go to the activity main.xml file first. So here I'll minimize this horizontal scroll view, also this recycler view, and I'll add the search view in between those. So let's make this UI prettier. We'll add a card view first. So I'll add a card view, and for the width of this card view I'll pass match parent, and for the height of this card view I'll pass wrap content. Okay, and then let's set the margin of our card view to, let's say, 14 dp. All right, and then I'll set the card elevation of our card view to 8 dp here. So now we'll go inside this card view, and here I'll add a search view, search view, and we're going to use the Android X search view here. And for the width of the search view I'll pass match parent, and for the height I'll pass attr attribute slash action bar size. So that will get the height of the default action bar. Let's close that. Let's give the search view an ID here. I'll call this search_view. Let's also set the default query hint here, so I'll write default query hint, and I'll write search news. Okay, and here I'll add another attribute which is iconified by default to false. That is because if we don't add that, then while searching we have to at first click on this search icon here, that will expand the search view, and then we have to write the text. But I don't want that. I want the search view expanded by default. So for this I'll add iconified by default to false. Okay, so here as you can see our search view is now expanded. Okay, so now we can go to our main activity.java here, and here I'll create the object for our search view. So search view, and from here we have to select the Android X.search view, not this Android.widget one, because we used the Android X search view in our XML file. So I'll call this as search view, and then I'll initialize it inside this onCreate method. So let search view equals find view by id r.id.search_view, and then I'll create a onQuery text listener for our search view. So I'll write search view here dot set onQuery text listener. I'll create a new search view dot onQuery text listener. So here we got the methods, the onQuery text change and onQuery text submit. So we won't change anything on the onQuery text change, because we will only fetch the news articles while the user submits the text. Okay, so here I'll return true, but before returning true we'll make the query. So for this again I'll just copy this 2 lines here, and I'll go up here, paste it here, and here the context is showing error. So I'll write main activity dot this here, maybe main activity dot this. Okay, so now for the get news headlines parameter, I'll pass the category as general, but for the query, instead of null we'll pass the text that the user typed inside this query. So I'll just pass this query here. Alright, so let's also add the progress dialog here. So I'll let progress, okay, we already had an object dialog dot set title, and here I'll write fetching news articles of, and I'll add the query here, and I'll start our dialog. So dialog dot show. Okay, so that's it for our search view. Now let's do one thing inside this on error. If the API returns an error, in that case we will just show a toast message. So here I'll write toast, and here for the text I'll pass an error occurred. Okay, so now let's do another thing. If the user searches for an item in the search view and submits that, but the API doesn't return us any result for that particular query, so in that case we'll show the user a message. Okay, so for this instead of showing the list, at first we'll check if the list that we are getting here dot is empty. In that case we'll show a toast message which will say no data found. Okay, and we'll add this show news in the else block. Okay, cut this and paste it here in the else block. Okay, so our news app is now fully ready. So now let's try to run our app for the final time. fetching news articles. So here is all the news articles that we got from the API. We can click on them to expand them, and then we can also select categories of news. So let's select technology. It will fetch the news articles of technology. For science, it will show us the news articles of science. Now let's try to search an item. So let's search for Olympic. Search. No data found. Okay, so let's search for another thing. So let's see what already exists. Saturn. Okay, so let's search for Saturn. Search. Okay, so here is the news article about Saturn. Okay, so that's how we can simply make a news application using REST API. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, because I'll be making more awesome videos like this. And thank you so much for watching.